What happens when the person you humiliated years ago holds your future in their hands? A desperate woman walks into a job interview only to face the CEO she once wronged. She expects revenge, but what happens next will leave you speechless. Stay with us to witness a powerful story of redemption, forgiveness, and second chances. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The room was silent except for the faint hum of an old ceiling fan struggling against the oppressive heat. A woman sat at a rickety table in the corner of a dimly lit apartment, her shoulders slumped with the weight of endless worry. Bills were scattered across the table, their red warnings glaring at her like accusations. Her fingers trembled as she clutched a worn pencil, jotting down calculations that never seemed to add up. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background, half empty, and barely keeping its contents cold. She glanced toward the small bed in the corner, where her young daughter lay asleep, clutching a threadbare stuffed animal. Her heart tightened. They had moved to this city in search of a fresh start. But life here was no kinder. Job after job had slipped through her fingers, leaving her days filled with rejection and her nights consumed by silent tears. In front of her sat a job application, the company's logo embossed at the top. This one felt different. It wasn't just another job. It was her last hope. She took a deep breath, willing herself to believe that tomorrow's interview could be the answer to all her problems. Little did she know, the person waiting for her on the other side of that door wasn't just a stranger, but someone who had every reason to turn her away, someone she had once hurt deeply. What she didn't expect was that this encounter would not only change her life, but also force her to confront the person she had been. "So how much farther could we go together?" she asked. Years ago, she was a woman of status and authority, seated comfortably in her plush office chair, her every word carrying weight. She thrived in her position of power, relishing the control it gave her over others. She had little patience for mistakes, and even less for people she deemed unworthy. Among her employees was a quiet, determined man, easily recognizable by the red MAGA hat he wore proudly on his commute. It was a small gesture, but one that irked her. His values, his demeanor, everything about him seemed to challenge her worldview, and she made no effort to hide her disdain. One afternoon during a routine staff meeting, he presented a proposal he had worked on tirelessly. His ideas were innovative, brimming with potential, but her response was icy. "This isn't what we're looking for," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Did you even think this through?" The room grew silent, colleagues exchanging uneasy glances. Her words stung, but it was her next remark that left a lasting scar. "Maybe you should spend less time making political statements and more time doing your job." Laughter rippled through the room, fueled by her sharp tone. He stood there, holding his ground, his expression stoic despite the humiliation. She mistook his silence for weakness, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. Over the weeks, she found more ways to undercut him, questioning his competence in public and assigning him tasks far beneath his role. What she didn't see, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the fire in his eyes, a quiet determination that her words could not extinguish. The memory of that time was distant now, yet it resurfaced in sharp fragments, unbidden and unrelenting. In the present, her life bore no resemblance to those days of power. Her once stable career had crumbled after a corporate merger led to widespread layoffs. Moving to a new city with her daughter had been a desperate gamble, one she now regretted as she sat in her sparsely furnished apartment, the walls closing in like silent spectators to her misery. Her mornings began with job boards and ended with rejection emails. Each, we regret to inform you, felt like another nail in the coffin of her confidence. She wasn't just losing jobs, she was losing pieces of herself. The proud, confident woman she once was had been replaced by someone she barely recognized. A mother scraping by, rationing groceries and praying her landlord wouldn't come knocking with another eviction notice. At night, when the city quieted and her daughter slept, the guilt crept in. Faces from her past haunted her, none more vividly than the man she had humiliated so mercilessly. She could still see the pain in his eyes, though he had never let it break his composure. Had she contributed to his struggles, as her actions now seemed to echo in her own life? Was this her karma, a reckoning for the years she spent tearing others down to prop herself up? One evening, as she scrolled through job listings for the 100th time, a posting caught her eye. It was for a high-ranking administrative role at a prestigious company she had heard of, but never dreamed of applying to. The position was beyond her reach, but desperation overruled doubt. She submitted her application, telling herself it was better to try and fail than to not try at all. When the interview invitation arrived days later, her initial relief was quickly replaced by anxiety. This was her last hope. Everything depended on her ability to impress them. She spent hours rehearsing answers, poring over her resume, and researching the company's history. What she didn't discover, what no search engine could have told her, was the identity of the man at the helm. The morning of the interview was fraught with nervous energy. She adjusted her blazer repeatedly, trying to mask the wear and tear of her thrift store wardrobe. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale and exhausted, but she forced herself to smile, whispering words of encouragement that felt hollow. Arriving at the towering headquarters, she was awed and intimidated in equal measure. The lobby was sleek and bustling, a far cry from the quiet desperation that had become her life. As she waited to be called in, she clutched her resume tightly, unaware that her past was about to catch up with her in the most unexpected way. The nameplate on the door read Chief Executive Officer, but she paid it no mind. She was focused on making a good impression, completely oblivious to the fact that the man waiting on the other side of this opportunity was the same man whose dignity she had tried so hard to strip away years ago. In that moment, she believed she was here to reclaim her life, but little did she know, this encounter would test not just her professionalism, but her very humanity. The ride to the company's headquarters felt longer than usual, the city passing in a blur outside the cab window. She sat stiffly, clutching her bag as if it might anchor her against the storm of nerves brewing inside. Her thoughts churned, a mix of hope and fear, as she rehearsed her answers for the interview. This was her last chance, she knew it, and the weight of that knowledge made her palms sweat. As the cab pulled up to the towering glass building, she stepped out, her knees feeling unsteady. The lobby was immaculate, bustling with professionals who moved with purpose. Everything about the place screamed success, making her feel like an imposter. She approached the receptionist, her voice shaky as she announced her appointment. With a polite smile, the receptionist handed her a visitor badge and directed her to the waiting area. Her eyes wandered, taking in the opulent surroundings. The walls were adorned with portraits of the company's leadership, each face exuding confidence and accomplishment. Her gaze landed on one portrait, and the air seemed to leave her lungs. It was him, the man she had humiliated all those years ago. His face was unmistakable, though time had added a quiet strength to his features. Below his portrait, his name was engraved, followed by the title, Chief Executive Officer. Her heart sank. Memories of her cruel words, her dismissive tone, and the laughter she had encouraged came flooding back. She felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. The man she had mocked, belittled, and dismissed was now the head of the very company she was seeking a job at. Her name was called, jolting her from her thoughts. She rose on shaky legs, her mind racing. As she was led to the conference room, she tried to compose herself, but the realization of who owned this company loomed large in her mind. The HR manager greeted her with a firm handshake, inviting her to sit. The room was sleek and modern, but she could barely register her surroundings. Her thoughts were consumed by the fear of recognition. The HR manager began with standard questions about her experience and qualifications. She stumbled through her answers, her voice faltering as doubt clouded her mind. Every question felt like a test, not just of her skills, but of her ability to keep her composure. Her mind kept drifting to the portrait in the lobby, and she wondered if he would remember her. Would he still hold a grudge? Would he use this opportunity to humiliate her as she had done to him? Unbeknownst to her, the MAGA Hat man was watching the interview unfold from a nearby room. He recognized her instantly, the memories of their past interactions surfacing with sharp clarity. He remembered her scornful tone, the way she had dismissed his ideas, and the pain of being publicly ridiculed. Yet, as he watched her now, he noticed something different. The arrogance she had once carried was gone, replaced by a nervousness that seemed genuine. His emotions were conflicted. Part of him felt vindicated, seeing her struggle. Another part was curious. Had she changed? Was she truly remorseful for the way she had treated him? He decided to observe a little longer, instructing his staff to continue the interview while he considered his next move. He watched his staff approaching him and remained standing as he spoke. The HR manager wrapped up the formal portion of the interview, thanking her for her time and assuring her that the final decision would come from the CEO himself. Her stomach churned at those words. She knew what that meant. He would see her application, her face, and he would remember. She couldn't imagine a scenario where he wouldn't use this opportunity to exact revenge. As she sat in the waiting area, waiting for the formalities to conclude, guilt consumed her. The memories of her actions felt sharper now, like daggers aimed directly at her conscience. She remembered the way she had spoken to him, the way she had laughed at his expense, and the way he had stood silently, absorbing it all without retaliating. She hadn't thought of him as a person back then, just an obstacle to be dismissed. Now, sitting in his company, she felt the full weight of her past actions. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bag, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Had she changed? Was she worthy of a second chance? Her reflection in the glass wall was pale, her eyes brimming with regret. She felt certain that her chances of getting the job were ruined, but what haunted her more was the thought that she had ruined something much greater than a career opportunity. She had hurt someone deeply, and now she feared she could never make it right. Bertram's Sarah, the HR manager had left the room, leaving her to wait in silence. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her thoughts raced, each one worse than the last. She tried to steady her breathing, but the weight of her past loomed heavy over her. Then the door opened. Her heart stopped. He stepped in, his presence commanding yet calm. The man from the portrait, the man she had humiliated so many years ago, was now standing before her. Time seemed to slow as their eyes met. Her face turned pale and she froze, unable to speak. His expression was unreadable, neither cold nor warm, but measured and deliberate. He walked toward the table, his movements controlled, and took the seat across from her. "Hazel, thank you for waiting," he said, his voice steady and professional. "I thought it would be best if I handled this part of the interview personally." Her throat tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. He waited patiently, his gaze unwavering, and she finally managed a trembling, "Thank you for the opportunity." He grinned and shook his head. She fought back tears. He nodded, glancing at her resume briefly before setting it down. "Your experience is impressive," he began, his tone even. "But let's talk about the kind of person you are. What motivates you? What do you value most in your work?" The question caught her off guard. She fumbled for an answer, her voice shaking. I value collaboration and growth," she said, though the words felt hollow under his penetrating gaze. She wondered if he could see through her, if he could sense her guilt. He leaned back slightly, his expression contemplative. "Do you believe people can change?" he asked. Her chest tightened. She knew this wasn't just a theoretical question. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said softly. "I believe they can. I believe... I've changed." He tilted his head, studying her. "Tell me about that." Her hands trembled in her lap as she took a deep breath. "I wasn't always fair to the people I worked with," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought being in charge meant being tough, but I was wrong. I hurt people. And I've regretted it ever since." His gaze didn't waver. "Regret is a powerful emotion," he said. "But what have you done with it?" His tone was brisk. It reminded her of Maya. Tears welled in her eyes as she met his steady gaze. "I've tried to be better," she said, her voice breaking. "I've worked on listening, on understanding others. I know I can't erase the past, but I want to prove that I've learned from it." There was a long pause, the silence heavy with unspoken tension. Then he leaned forward, his voice softer but still firm. "We've met before, haven't we?" Her breath hitched. She nodded slowly, tears spilling over. "Yes," she whispered. "I remember." "Do you remember how you treated me?" he asked, his tone free of malice but laced with meaning. She broke down, the guilt she had carried for years finally spilling out. "I do," she said through sobs. "I was cruel. I was arrogant. I thought so little of you, and I was so wrong. I can't begin to express how sorry I am." Her deep sighs proved it all. He let her words hang in the air, his expression calm. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "But this isn't about the past. It's about who you are now and who you want to be moving forward. Guy felt the pressure of the words swelling in his chest as he opened his eyes and looked at Glory. Her tears didn't stop, but she straightened in her chair, her voice steadier now. I want to be someone who builds others up, not tears them down. I want to use my experiences, my mistakes, to help others grow. It's the ritual of life, she said, laying her hand gently on my forearm. He nodded, his demeanor thoughtful. Do you know why I chose to speak with you personally? He asked. She shook her head, her brow furrowed in confusion. Because I believe in second chances, he said simply. When I left that job, I told myself I wouldn't let anyone define my worth but me. Your actions hurt, but they also fueled me. They pushed me to work harder, to prove to myself that I was capable of more than you thought. Her eyes widened, her guilt deepening. I never meant, she began, but he held up a hand, stopping her gently. I know, he said. But intent doesn't erase impact. What matters is what we do with the lessons we learn. You've had time to reflect, and from what I've seen today, you've changed. That's why I'm offering you the job. Her breath caught. She stared at him in disbelief, unable to process what she had just heard. You? You're offering me the job? She asked, her voice trembling. Sighing grimly, yes, he said with a small smile. Your qualifications speak for themselves, but it's your willingness to grow that convinced me. Everyone deserves a chance to prove they're more than their mistakes. She broke down completely, overcome with emotion. I don't know how to thank you, she said, tears streaming down her face. You've given me more than I deserve. You don't need to thank me, he replied. Just use this opportunity to show yourself and others what you're truly capable of, he went on. His voice was drowned out by the sound of motors, the scratching of the pad, and the sharp rapping on the glass. She nodded, her heart full of gratitude and a newfound determination. As she left the room, her tears continued to flow, but this time they weren't just tears of guilt. They were tears of hope. The man she had once hurt had shown her kindness and grace she never imagined, and she vowed to honor his faith in her by becoming the person she was meant to be. The HR manager's polite departure left her alone in the vast, sterile conference room. The hum of the central air conditioning was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. She sat still, her fingers clasped tightly together, her knuckles white with the tension of holding herself together. Her heart raced as she replayed the HR manager's words in her mind. The CEO himself will review your application and make the final decision. Her stomach churned. The CEO. She had seen his portrait on the wall in the lobby, his image unmistakable. She had only glanced at it briefly, but that brief moment was enough to recognize him. The realization had struck her like lightning, leaving her breathless and unsteady. It was him. The man she had mocked and dismissed so many years ago, back when she held all the power. The man she had humiliated in front of their colleagues, dismissing his ideas and making him the butt of cruel jokes. And now? Now, he was the one holding her fate in his hands. Her chest tightened as memories of those days flooded back. She had been so arrogant then, so self-assured in her position of authority. She had prided herself on her sharp tongue and cutting wit, never pausing to consider the impact her words might have on others. She could still see his face in her mind, his expression stoic as she belittled him during a team meeting. She had mistaken his quiet resilience for weakness, and she had taken every opportunity to undermine him. She closed her eyes, the shame washing over her like a tide. She had tried to put those days behind her, to become a better person. But sitting here, in this sleek and modern office, all of her past misdeeds felt like weights dragging her down. How could she possibly expect him to forgive her? How could she even begin to ask for a second chance when she had done nothing to earn it? The door opened and her breath caught. Slowly she looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. He stepped into the room, his movements measured and deliberate. He was older now, his features sharper, his presence commanding in a way that made her feel small and insignificant. He was impeccably dressed, his tailored suit a testament to his success. He walked toward the chair across from her and sat down, placing a file on the table. "Thank you for waiting," he said, his voice calm and even. He opened the file, glancing at its contents before meeting her gaze. "I wanted to handle this part of the interview personally." Her throat felt dry, her mind scrambling to find a response. Finally, she managed to stammer, "Thank you for the opportunity." He nodded, his expression unreadable. The question was simple enough, but she could feel the weight behind it. This wasn't just about her qualifications. It was a probe into her character. She hesitated, her mind racing as she tried to form an answer that might satisfy him. The weight of his gaze was suffocating, her palms slick with sweat. I value collaboration," she said finally, her voice shaky, "and growth. I've learned that working with others and supporting their success is just as important as achieving your own. By working together, we can scale up together, you know?" He tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady and sharp. "Have you always believed that?" he asked, his tone calm but piercing. Her stomach dropped. She shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes fixed on her. "We've met before, haven't we?" he asked, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. Her chest tightened, and she nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. "Yes," she whispered. "I remember." "Do you remember how you treated me?" he continued, his tone neutral but laced with significance. Tears pricked her eyes as she nodded again, her voice trembling with guilt. "I do," she said, her voice breaking. "And I am so sorry. I was arrogant and cruel. I thought so little of you, and I can't begin to express how much I regret it." End of chapter 15. Recording by Jimmy Cochran, Monroe, California. Her words spilled out in a rush, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've spent years trying to be better, to learn from my mistakes, to treat people with the respect they deserve. I know I can't erase the past, but I want you to know how deeply I regret the pain I caused you." He studied her silently, his expression unreadable. The pause that followed was unbearable, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, his voice softer but still firm. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "But regret alone isn't enough. What matters is what you've done with it." Her tears spilled over, her voice trembling as she tried to explain. "I've tried to change," she said. "I've worked on listening, on understanding others. I've made it my mission to build people up instead of tearing them down. I know I failed before, but I've worked every day to make sure I never fail like that again." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Change is hard," he said. "It takes more than words. But from what I've seen today, I believe you've started that journey." Her breath hitched, her chest tightening with emotion. "I want to keep proving it," she said earnestly, her voice steady despite her tears. "I want to show that I've learned, that I'm not the same person I was." He leaned back slightly, his tone introspective. "Do you know why I wanted to speak with you personally?" he asked. She shook her head, her confusion mingling with fear. "Because I believe in second chances," he said simply. "When I left that job, I told myself I wouldn't let anyone define my worth but me. Your actions hurt, but they also motivated me. They pushed me to work harder, to prove to myself that I was capable of more than you thought." Her eyes widened, her guilt deepening as his words sank in. "I never meant to," she began, but he held up a hand gently, stopping her. "I know," he said, "but intent doesn't erase impact. What matters is what we do with the lessons we learn. And from what I've seen, you've learned. That's why I'm offering you the job." Her breath caught. She stared at him, disbelief and emotion flooding her face. You're offering me the job?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not while you're making the same mistakes I made with the job," Brack said. "Yes," he said, a faint smile softening his features. "Your qualifications speak for themselves, but it's your willingness to grow that convinced me. Everyone deserves a chance to prove they're more than their mistakes." The first day at her new job was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. As she walked through the sleek halls of the office building, every detail seemed to echo the enormity of the opportunity she had been given. Her new workspace was modest but pristine, a blank slate for the fresh start she desperately needed. She took a deep breath, settling into her chair, her fingers brushing over the desk as though grounding herself in this new reality. She was determined to prove herself. This wasn't just about a paycheck or survival, it was about redemption. She had been given a chance not many people received, and she wasn't going to waste it. The first few days were intense. She spent hours studying company policies, familiarizing herself with workflows, and diving deep into tasks with single-minded focus. Her colleagues, though initially wary, began to take notice of her dedication. She made it a point to treat everyone she encountered with respect and humility, asking questions when she needed help, and offering assistance wherever she could. Slowly, the walls of hesitation around her colleagues began to crumble, replaced by cautious camaraderie. Her interactions with the MAGA Hat man were professional but surprisingly warm. He often stopped by her desk to check on her progress, his tone calm and encouraging. Their conversations were brief but meaningful, each one a reminder of how far they had both come. She admired his leadership style, firm but fair, with a genuine interest in his employees' growth. It was clear that he led with both his head and his heart, a combination she now aspired to emulate. One particularly busy afternoon, she noticed a younger colleague struggling with a complex project. He was hunched over his desk, his face etched with frustration. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if her offer of help would be welcome. But then she remembered the countless times she had been in his position, overwhelmed and unsure, and how much a kind gesture could mean. She approached him cautiously. "Hey," she said softly, placing a hand on the edge of his desk. "You look like you could use a hand. Want to talk it through?" Traynor shook his head. "Not really." She smiled. "You're not." He looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and relief. "Yeah," he admitted, "I've been stuck on this for hours. I think I'm overcomplicating it." She pulled up a chair and leaned in, listening intently as he explained the issue. Together, they broke the problem down into manageable steps, her calm guidance helping to untangle the mess in his mind. By the time they finished, his face had lit up with a newfound confidence. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I was really struggling. You didn't have to help, but I'm glad you did." She smiled, and warmth spreading through her chest. "We've all been there," she said. "Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything." That moment stayed with her, a small but significant victory in her journey toward becoming the person she wanted to be. It wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about lifting others up, about contributing to an environment where everyone could thrive. For the first time in years, she felt like she was making a difference. As the weeks turned into months, her transformation became undeniable. Her colleagues began to seek her out for advice and collaboration, valuing her insights and appreciating her approachable demeanor. The woman who had once been known for her sharp tongue and arrogance was now a source of support and encouragement, a testament to the power of change. Her relationship with the MAGA Hat man continued to evolve as well. Though their interactions remained professional, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared acknowledgement of the journey they had both taken to get to this point. He often challenged her with thought-provoking questions during meetings, pushing her to think critically and refine her ideas. She rose to those challenges with determination, her confidence growing with each success. One afternoon, he called her into his office for a one-on-one discussion. As she sat across from him, she couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness, though it was tempered by the respect she had developed for him. "You've been here for a few months now," he began, leaning back in his chair. "How do you feel about your progress?" She took a moment to gather her thoughts. "I feel like I'm finally finding my place," she said honestly. "I've learned so much, not just about the job, but about myself. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm committed to making the most of it. But let's discuss that later." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I've been impressed with what I've seen," he said. "You've not only adapted quickly, but have also shown a willingness to grow. That's rare, and it's something I value." His words filled her with a quiet pride, but it was his next statement that truly struck her. "I think it's important for you to know," he continued, "that your presence here isn't just about redemption. It's about the potential I see in you. You've proven that you're capable of more than your past, and I hope you'll continue to build on that." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding firmly. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than I can say." The next morning was spent researching the disappearance of the girls. She had been left at home. That conversation marked a turning point for her. It wasn't just about earning back the trust of others. It was about believing in her own capacity to grow and to make a meaningful impact. She carried that belief with her in everything she did, from mentoring new hires to contributing to major projects. One evening as she walked home from the office, the city lights casting a warm glow around her, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. The woman she had been, the one who had used her power to belittle others, who had let arrogance cloud her judgment, felt like a distant memory. In her place was someone she could be proud of, someone who had worked tirelessly to earn her second chance. She thought about the MAGA Hat man and the grace he had shown her. His kindness and belief in her potential had been the catalyst for her transformation, a reminder that forgiveness could be a powerful force for change. She vowed never to take that gift for granted, to honor his faith in her by continuing to grow and to help others do the same. Her journey wasn't over, but she knew she was on the right path. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful, not just for her own future, but for the impact she could have on the world around her. And that hope was a gift she would carry with her, a testament to the power of second chances and the possibility of redemption. She looked over at the men, estimating their length of time, and saw a suggestion of hair on the face, longer than usual. Sometimes, the people we hurt the most are the ones who show us the greatest kindness. This story is not just about redemption. It's about the extraordinary power of forgiveness to transform lives. Forgiveness isn't a weakness. It's a strength that heals both the one who gives it and the one who receives it. The MAGA Hat man's ability to look beyond his past pain and extend grace to someone who had wronged him is a reminder that second chances have the power to create change, not just for individuals, but for the world around them. Now it's your turn to reflect. Think about the moments in your life when you were given a second chance. Did it change your path? Or perhaps there was a time you chose forgiveness, even when it wasn't easy, and saw how it impacted someone else. We'd love to hear your story. Have you ever been given a second chance that changed your life? Or have you given someone else a second chance that made all the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about the power of kindness and growth. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of transformation and hope. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, because sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to change a life forever.